Thank you for your patience, jurors. And remember, Mr. Felix is still on the stand, and we will turn it over to cross-examination. Mr. Curley, you ready? Go ahead, sir.
Judge, I will just announce the first stipulation of the parties states exhibit 321.
321 and
322.
322 admitted.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sorry about the delay.
That's okay.
Now, just to sort of explain, you use your own sheriff's system numbering, right? When you are given items from another agency, right?
Yes, when the agency submits evidence, the evidence unit assigns a unique case number and then begins a numbering system to keep track of all the evidence, yes.
And so just for an example of that, if we look at State's Exhibit 110, which has been labeled projectiles 1 through 4, I believe, I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but this has a sticker on it from your agency, the sheriff's office.
Yes, it has a sticker barcode with the case number and what's labeled on the property receipt that says projectiles numbers 1 through 4, yes.
And it says submission
Number 9.
number 9. And
Correct.
so you've been talking about submissions based on the fact that in your report, you refer to the items that have been given to you by the submission number that you have assigned to that, correct?
Correct. So the submission 9 that's on the report coincides with the submission on the envelope, yes.
And of course, also have a Jupiter Police Department sticker that has their own numbering system for each of these things.
Yes, yes, they have their own numbering system, yes.
And then we have an exhibit card here which has the court's numbering system.
Correct, correct, yes.
And so you were talking about a number of projectiles and fragments that you have examined and made conclusions about, and I want to talk a little bit about making sure we're clear on where those items actually came from, okay?
Okay, sure.
So, I want to start with what you've identified as submission 001-32. What is that?
That is one fired .762 caliber jacketed hollow point bullet.
And there's a description on your report of that, correct?
Correct.
And what is that?
It says projectile from right scapula.
And do you base that description off of documents and things that are given to you along with that projectile?
Yes, the document that I use is what's written on the property receipt.
Okay. And I'm going to approach you with what we just stated submitted by stipulation 321 and 322. And is this sort of the manila type envelope that you would obtain these projectiles in?
Yes.
Okay, and on this one in particular, 321 and 322, it has that description, projectile right scapula.
Yes.
And is this, what you see in this picture, is that consistent with the projectile that you would have examined as submission 001-32?
Yes, I can actually compare it to the images that I have in my file. That's okay.
If you'd be comfortable doing that, go ahead.
Sure, yes. Yes, it's consistent with the photograph that I took of the piece of evidence, yes.
And this particular projectile you determined was fired by the 7.62 rifle that you were provided, correct?
Correct, yes.
All right. And permission to publish, Your Honor? Yes, sir. Please. So, Mr. Felix, you're talking about how this packaging that's right here, this is packaging that you received this projectile inside, right?
Yes.
And this is, you had the chance to get submissions that come from the medical examiner's office that was covered during the autopsy?
Yes.
And this is how those things are typically packaged, correct?
Correct. This is consistent with typical packaging from the medical examiner's office,
And
yes.
so this description will be from the medical examiner describing where this particular projectile was located?
Yes, I believe they're the ones that actually write that out and put the label on the envelope, yes.
And it has Dr. R.M.M. here, which is Dr. Rebecca
That I don't know the initials, no, I don't know.
And the name is above you, telling the story, that would be the name of the decedent whose body was projectile.
I would assume that. I don't know who the victims were.
And in your report, you don't say that this projectile was the projectile recovered from the right scapula of Ms. Dougherty. You were just describing it as projectile.
Yeah, exactly. So the description is just based on what the paperwork says, just so that it could be tied back to a particular piece of evidence.
All right. And then submission 002-48, based off of your report,
Yes.
what do you have that described as?
Well, submission 2-48 had multiple items in that bag.
Okay, and if we look at A1, a projectile from the chest cavity,
Correct.
and what were you able to determine from your examination of that particular item?
That particular item was a fragment, and I was not able to make any type of determination. I couldn't tell whether it was fired or not fired from any of the firearms.
And in your report there, you said you had some photographs of that you would be able to compare to other photographs. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. I'd like to approach you with states 233 and 228. It appears to me that these are two different submissions, two different projectiles that were provided to you. Is that correct?
That appears to be yes. So they were actually in two different packages.
Okay, yes. And so this one, which is described as a projectile from Sean Henry, which submission of yours would that correspond to?
Submission 2-48, A1, and A2. So there's basically, what I did was I just labeled them 1 and 2.
This one right here.
Yes.
Okay. And you did A1 and A2 because
There are two items.
pieces, right?
Correct.
And what were you able to determine about these fragments or projectiles that were recovered from the body of Mr. Anderson?
Well, A1 was inconclusive. Again, I could not determine that it was fired from that rifle. However, A2, I was able to determine that it was fired in the submission 14 rifle.
And the one that you could not determine, that was still consistent with what you might expect to see as far as a fragment from a 7.62 projectile from the rifle.
It was consistent in appearance, but that's about it. It was just an appearance.
And some of the fragments that you've looked at, some you've been able to determine were in fact fired from the rifle, and some inconclusive, right?
Correct. I believe there's only one of the fragments was inconclusive, but yes, some of the projectiles were identified to the rifle. Yes.
And when it comes to a rifle round, like a 7.62 round, it is not uncommon for a round of that nature to fragment when it strikes a body or something physical in the environment, right?
It's not uncommon. The speeds at which it's traveling, it's traveling almost sometimes twice the speed of sound. It upon impact sometimes will fragment or be damaged.
And I think yesterday we heard from one of the medical examiners, Dr. Juice, and that was her experience also, that the high velocity of those rounds often causes them to fragment when they strike a bone or other structure inside the body. And that's consistent with sort of your understanding of the velocity associated with those rounds?
Yes, with the velocity, I would expect that occasionally it would hit something hard and actually break up.
And could you look at states 233, which is another image of a projectile, or is this a bullet core?
It appears to be from the photograph, if I can compare it to my notes. In my notes, I have it as... Sorry, flipping back and forth here. 248B. Yes, I labeled it as it's a probable lead core. It's consistent with a lead core, meaning just the center of the projectile. Projectile sometimes is consisted of a lead or metal center core and then surrounded by a copper or steel jacket which comes on the outside of the core.
And this bullet core or projectile that was recovered from Sean Henry, what were you able to determine about this?
Nothing, there was nothing to really compare to because this didn't have any type of markings on it to make any type of comparison.
Consistent with the round from a 7.62 rifle, despite the fact you can't be conclusively fired from that rifle?
Actually, I couldn't even make it that determination in and of itself as to what caliber or anything.
Now, in submission 2,
Yes,
you have 2 .40 caliber copper jacketed bullets, correct? That you
Correct.
examined?
correct.
And I believe you concluded that those had been fired from the Glock that was also submitted to you?
No, those were actually inconclusive results.
Okay. And that's because sometimes, even though it's the same caliber and maybe consistent with having been fired, you just can't say for certainty that that particular weapon fired it, right?
Correct. It was consistent with it, but again, yes, not determined that that Glock pistol fired those bullets.
And just so we're clear, the states exhibit 231 and 232 labeled as projectiles from Sean Henry. These are the 2 items that you're referring to in this
Left
section, right?
arm. So as- Yes, those are the 2 projectiles, yes.
Now, you talked about examining shell casings also,
Yes.
correct? Actually, I'm sorry, before we get to the shell casings, you were never asked to examine anything that was labeled as fragments from abdomen, is that correct?
If I can just quickly look there, let's see. I don't see anything in that I have listed as fragments from abdomen, no.
And you didn't examine fragments from pubis, nothing with that description?
No, I don't have anything listed under with that.
And you just examine the things that are provided to you, right?
Yes, I could just examine what's submitted to the agency, yes.
And you're not the one that makes the decision about what is in fact submitted to you for examination, right?
No, just the agency submits the evidence, and I would examine what they submit.
Now, did you receive anything labeled as a jacket from abdominal wall?
An abdominal wall. No, I don't see anything listed as that, no.
Were you asked to examine fragments from right lateral thigh?
No.
And you weren't asked to examine fragments from right knee, right?
Right knee. No, I don't see that listed in my report, no.
Okay, turning to the shell casings that you were provided, you were given 17 7.62 shell casings that had already been fired, right?
Correct, 17, yes.
And which tells you that since you determined they were all from that particular rifle, that rifle was fired at least 17 times to produce those shell casings, right?
Yes, yes. So that rifle fired 17 of all the casings, yes.
You don't know if that rifle fired more than that?
No, I don't know if I fired more than that, no.
I had a question for you. You referred to what you described as a hollow point bullet.
Yes.
Mr. Felix, while the clerk's helping you locate some things, that rifle is not what would be described as an automatic rifle, correct? Semi-automatic, but it doesn't have an automatic fire function where you can just hold down the trigger.
Correct. The terminology, there's 2 slightly different types of automatic systems. An automatic system is when you would pull the trigger, the firearm would discharge, the gun would go off, and the gun would keep firing as long as you depress the trigger. Sometimes it's referred to as just a machine gun. So you pull the trigger, the gun keeps firing until you release the trigger or you run out of ammunition. However, with a semi-automatic system, you would pull the trigger once, the firearm would fire once. However, in order to fire the next round, you would have to release the trigger and then pull it again. So for each shot, you have to pull and then release the trigger and then pull and release the trigger.
And so for a gun like that, where you have to pull the trigger each time you fire it, you can fire that gun as fast as you can pull the trigger.
Yes, yes.
And 17 shots can be fired in a very rapid time by that method, despite not being fully automatic, correct?
Sure, yeah, you can fire it, again, as fast as you can pull the trigger. That's how fast the firearm would fire.
And you talked about hollow point bullets.
Yes.
Those are, some of the 7.62 rounds you examined were hollow point and some were not, correct?
Correct.
And you described, when you were explaining how a semi-automatic firearm ejects shell casings, that generally those firearms are designed with the ejection port on the right-hand side of the firearm?
Typically, yes, the firearms are designed with the ejection port on the right-hand side, yes.
And the rifle that you examined in this case, the Roam Arm
Yes.
rifle, that had the ejection port on the right-hand side?
Yes.
Just 1 second, please. I don't have any other questions for you, Mr. Felix.
Any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Mr. Felix, going back to submission 2,
Yes.
you were shown 2 photographs, Exhibit 231 and 232. Now, I'm going to approach you and let you take a look at it so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And you were asked on cross-examination about these 2 photographs being labeled with the name Sean Henry on them.
Yes, the photographs have Sean Henry, yes.
And these are actually I'll take one just to put one up. And earlier we talked a lot about the different parts of a cartridge. Is this the bullet?
That is the bullet, the projectile, yes.
Okay. And you were able to make a comparison but not an identification?
Yes, I was able to compare it using the comparison microscope, but I could not make a conclusive identification as to was fired from the Glock pistol.
Okay, and we know the Glock pistol is .40 caliber.
Yes.
Okay, and so despite you not being able to say that it was fired from the .40 caliber Glock pistol that you received in submission 4, were you able to determine that this bullet was in fact .40 caliber?
Yes, yes, I was able to determine it was .40 caliber by measuring the diameter of the bullet. It measured 0.40 inches in diameter, approximately.
And submission 4 was a .40 caliber Glock pistol, correct?
Yes.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
You may step down, sir. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
And watch your step. State, call your next witness.
Dr. MacDougall?
Dr. MacDougall, please.
Is this all the same stuff or something? Or just one? It's all.
Of course.
Um,
Okay, doctor, sorry about that. I apologize. And then watch your step. When you get around the screen, if you raise your right hand, face Mr. Clerk for us. All right, you're going to have a seat right up there. Watch your step. And please just make sure you talk directly into the center of that microphone. The base moves, the neck of it stretches wherever you'd like it. And once you get yourself situated, and you got your papers out, whatever you need, once you're all set, then state your full name for the record and slowly spell it for the jurors, please.
My name is Rebecca MacDougall.
REBECCA-MACDOUGALL.
State, you may proceed.
Hi, good afternoon.
How are you?
Thank you. How about yourself?
I'm great.
Please tell us what your occupation is, ma'am.
I am an associate medical examiner at the Broward County Medical Examiner's Office.
Let's begin with your educational background. Tell us about yourself.
Went to undergraduate at the University of Texas. I went to medical school at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston, Texas. I did a 4-year anatomic and clinical pathology residency at Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas. And I did a 1-year forensic pathology fellowship at the Broward County Medical Examiner's Office.
I'm going to go a little bit more in depth in a moment, but can you tell us what pathology means?
So pathology is the study of disease.
Right. Now, after your, tell us about your initial, what you just said at the very end, that you went with Broward County for a year.
So I did a fellowship. So after my initial training in pathology, my residency, I did a 1-year forensic pathology fellowship where you learn about forensic pathology.
And tell us what that is. Tell us, first of all, what's a fellowship and what is forensic pathology?
Okay, so a fellowship is a subspecialty in an area of medicine. Cardiology, GI docs for internal medicine clinicians. For pathologists, you can do hematology, you can do GI pathology, you can do breast pathology, or you can do forensic pathology. I chose to do forensic pathology.
And what does forensic mean?
So forensic is tying in the legal aspect or the study of injuries and accidents, and so stab wounds or gunshot wounds or multiple blunt force injuries, and tying in how to determine cause and manner of death when it comes to people that die, whether it be of a violent means, homicide, suicide, or accident, or just a natural progression of some disease process, which is pathology.
And you studied under a medical examiner for a year in Broward County?
I did.
And what year was that?
2010.
What did you do at the end of your fellowship?
Took another board exam.
Okay. And
Passed that. And then
what are board exams?
So to become board certified at every step of the process, in medical school you have 3 exams you have to take, USMLE 1, 2, and 3. When you do a residency, whatever your residency is in, you have another exam you have to take to become board certified. So I took that exam for anatomic pathology. And then after you do your year fellowship in forensic pathology, you take another board exam to become board certified in forensic pathology.
And did you pass that?
I did.
And so after you passed that forensic pathology board exam, what'd you do?
I stayed in Broward.
And for how long did you stay in Broward?
Stayed in Broward until November of 2015.
And when we say stay in Broward, where exactly did you work?
I was at the Broward, I was an associate, so I went from being a fellow at the Broward County Medical Examiner's Office to becoming an associate medical examiner.
And you stayed there from 2010 to 2015, correct?
Correct.
And being an associate medical examiner, did you conduct or perform autopsies?
I did.
How many do you think you've done in your entire career?
About 2,000.
During the course of your, and we'll talk a little bit in a moment about after November 2015 where you went, but during the course of all of those autopsies that you have conducted, have you had the opportunity to conduct autopsies where the cause and the manner of death was believed or determined to be homicide?
I have.
And even more specific, homicide by gunshot wounds.
I have.
And in your educational background, your training, and your experience, have you studied and been experienced in looking at deceased individuals who have died from gunshot wounds?
I have.
And have you looked at them, people who have died from one single gunshot wound and or multiple gunshot wounds?
I have.
As well as died from different, what you found out later, different caliber of gun ammunition?
I have.
So after 2015, where did you go? November 2015, you left Broward. Where'd you go?
Came to Palm Beach.
And how long did you stay at the Palm Beach County Medical Examiner's
Until
office?
May of 2017.
Now, the reasons why you left, and then you went back to Broward, is that right?
Back to Broward.
And when did you go back to Broward? May of 2017?
So I left May 30th and went back to Broward June 1st.
All right. And the reason you went back and forth a few times, was it just due to the amount of work or the understaffing that Palm Beach County had at the time?
That's correct.
All right, there
I
was,
mean, I moved to Palm Beach. I was going to stay here, but the work was just with the opioids. It was just
Overdoses?
Too much, yeah.
all right. Since you left, though, they've restaffed and hired more medical examiners, right?
They did.
All right, but now you're back at Broward.
I am.
All right, so tell us when you were in Palm Beach County from 2015 to 2017, about how many medical examiners were there?
There were 4.
And as a medical examiner back then, were you randomly assigned cases?
We were.
And did you get assigned the autopsy of Brandi L. Salhi as well as Kelly Dougherty?
I did.
And Dr. Joost, was she a colleague of yours?
She was.
Even though they were at the same incident, there were 3 victims at the same homicide, she took one of them, right? Sean
That's
Henry.
correct.
Okay. Now, as a medical examiner, we'll talk about certainly the specifics of each of these young ladies' autopsies, but just walk us through the general steps of an autopsy. In other words, are you documenting your steps and your findings as you go along?
Yep.
All right, go ahead.
In cases that come to the office where they're suspicious, okay, they come to our office in a body bag that is sealed with a red tag. That red tag is broken, that seal is broken by the medical examiner, which was me in these 2 cases, and the bags are opened. Once the bags are opened, we take what we call overall photographs. So that's photographs of the body before we even touch them. Once those photographs are taken and evidence is collected, then the bodies are cleaned. The bodies are cleaned, and then we start documenting what we see on the body, whether it be injuries, tattoos, scars, any identifying features of that individual, the color of their eyes, the condition of their teeth, the color of their hair, all of that is documented. When there are injuries, I letter those injuries starting at A until I get to the last letter, until I get to the last injury, and then we take specific measurements on those injuries depending on what they are. That is called the external examination. Once the external examination is done, we begin our internal examination, which is a complete autopsy where we take out and look at every organ one by one. We weigh them. We look for disease. We look for injuries. In gunshot wound cases, we track the pathway of the bullet or the projectile. If there's projectiles retained, we collect those as evidence.
Okay.
Once that's done, the autopsy is complete.
All right. Now, do you have autopsy technicians that are assisting you?
We do.
And are you speaking into a recorder, so you are recording your steps?
I don't. I type my own reports from photographs.
All right, and that's what I wanted to ask you. At the end of all the autopsies, do you look at all your notes and your photos, and do you then present your findings in a very thorough, lengthy, detailed report,
I do.
as well as your photographs?
That's correct.
And any criminal prosecution, do you then make all of that available to any prosecutors and/or defense attorneys?
That's correct.
Right? And did you do so in these 2 autopsies with Kelly Dougherty and Brandi?
I did.
Right. Now, let's, Ms. Nixon's finished. Did you do Kelly's first? Yes. And defense attorneys, I'm going to show you what's been marked as composite exhibit, state exhibit 323A through Q. You all take an enormous amount of photos, is that correct?
We do.
All right. Did we kind of pare those down?
We did.
Go ahead and flip through those and make sure that those are the ones that we have selected to present and document your findings here in these cases. And do those photographs represent the injuries on Miss Kelly Dougherty that you documented during her autopsy?
They do?
Stage 323, A through Q in evidence at this point?
Other than the previous objections? All right, admitted.
Now, tell us, first of all, do you have your report up there with you?
I do.
If at any time you need to look at that report for accuracy purposes, just let us know. Could you tell us what was the date and approximate time of Kelly's autopsy?
Kelly's autopsy was done on the 7th of February. The seal was broken at 09:17 in the morning.
And when you say the seal was broken, what does that mean?
So the time that I start my autopsy is when I break the red seal on the bag,
Okay.
because the bag comes to us sealed.
All right. And the bag, meaning the bag that's covering and contains Kelly Dougherty's body?
The body bag, yes, ma'am.
So 9:17 a.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you tell us your just initial findings about Kelly, her age, gender, and race?
She is a white female. She's 20 years old. She's 5'11" and 173 pounds.
Beginning to publish State's Exhibit A. And do you all assign your own case number to these?
We do.
And was it the same case number for each victim or different?
They're all different. So everybody that comes into the Palm Beach County Medical Examiner's office gets a numeric number. The 17 is for the year, and she's 0177, so the 177th body that year.
February of 2017.
Correct.
And the medical examiners, do you all do homicides, suicides, car accidents, overdoses?
Natural deaths, yeah.
Not every single one.
Not every single. Most of our natural deaths are the snowbirds, so people that come to Florida. If they don't have a Florida doctor and you die in this state, a Florida doctor has to sign your death certificate. So even if you have a lot of medical problems, but your primary care doctor's in New York, and you're here for 3 months in the wintertime, then they have to come to our office so that we can sign their death certificate. We don't. If we have enough medical records that we can say within a degree of medical certainty that this is what caused their death, then we can do just the external part of our exam.
I think there's a razor blade up there.
Yes?
Oh, it is? If you need it, if you ever need to step down, just tell me, I can step down.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about this photo.
So this is, we call it a headshot. So an identification photo we'll take on every victim, every person that comes into our office that correlates a face with the case number. That's what this picture is.
And this is more than just a headshot, though, correct?
In this headshot, you can see some of the injuries, both gunshot wounds and the abrasions.
All right. You stated that you number your photographs or you letter your photographs, correct? Starting with A.
I letter my injuries with gunshot wounds and stab wounds. I try to start at the top of the body and go down and then the front to back. It doesn't always work out that way. But for this case, the defect lettered A would be the one that's on her chin. That is an entrance gunshot wound.
And
in the chin. That's an entrance gunshot wound.
That's an entrance or an exit?
An entrance.
Okay. Let's talk just generally a little bit more specifically. Did you notice that Kelly had defects in her teeth also?
She does.
And was that from a gunshot wound?
I didn't think so.
Okay, so that was just her natural teeth?
That's correct.
So let's look then, and if you can tell me from this photograph where, actually, let me put C up here. We'll go back to A in a moment. Tell us about this photograph. Where is A, and then show us where B is.
May I step down?
You may, watch your step.
So this is a picture of the right side of Kelly's face. This gunshot wound actually has 4 parts, has an entrance and an exit and a re-entrance and an exit. This is gunshot wound A went in the chin, came out on the right side of the jaw. The lower jaw is the mandible. So that is the exit for the first part of the pathway of that projectile.
In terms of, let me jump back a bit. How many times was Kelly shot overall? 4 different times she was shot?
Correct. She has 4, there's 4 and 5, I'm sorry, so yeah, she's 4.
4. So you don't know the order that they have to do?
I do not.
Okay, but for our purposes, for organizational, we say this is A, this is one shot, entrance, exit, correct? And then let's look at D. Remember D? What is D? This is the exit. What do you mean by the exit?
Is there a C?
There should be a C. I need to. I'm sorry? What? Okay, I know. It's not marked with your numbers, but let's look at, if you can tell us from this first photograph.
I can.
Okay.
So A is on the chin. We just saw B goes outside the right side of the jaw. The defect that I labeled C is the one on the right side of her chest, right above her clavicle. That is called a re-entrance gunshot wound. And then the D on the back of the right arm is the exit, the final pathway of that.
So we have an entrance at A, an exit at B, another entrance at C, and an exit at D. Is that correct? Okay. And is that, in your medical opinion, the same projectile?
Correct.
Because you told us you, if possible, you could study the path.
That's correct.
All right. So with that A, B, C, D, can you tell us what parts of the body internally this projectile went through?
So it gets skin, soft tissue, muscle, and bone in the face, so the jaw is broken. Then it goes back in and gets skin, soft tissue, muscle, and bone with a contusion of the lung, which is just a bruise. So it's mostly just skin, soft tissue, muscle, and bone.
Okay. The lawyers always like to ask, well, was this a fatal wound? All right. So assuming that was the only gunshot wound that Kelly Dougherty ever received, would that have killed her instantly? If you know. If you don't know, that's fine.
Any gunshot wound can be fatal. There are big arteries in your arm that you could potentially lose a lot of blood. Initially or immediately fatal, no. Does it have the possibility of being fatal? Sure.
Okay. Now, so we did A, B, C, D. Let's go to E and F, or E, and I'm going to show
So E and F is a perforating. Okay, the other gunshot wound was also perforating. These are perforating gunshot wounds, which means I have an entrance and an exit. It perforates through. E and F is a perforating gunshot wound to the right forearm.
All right, so where, can we see F? Where did you label that? Is it still within
It's,
here?
or it's on the other side. I mean, it's there somewhere, yeah.
So when you said the right, so if Kelly's, from Kelly here, this is her right arm,
Correct.
E and F, was this, when you say E and F, was E an entrance and F an exit, or vice versa?
That's correct. E's the entrance.
So what damage did, what happened here?
A number of possibilities. There could be an intermediary target. Okay, so if a projectile hits something hard before it hits a person, if it goes through a windshield of a car, if it hits a rock on the ground or cement, it can go into many different pieces and make much more damaging effects to that part of the arm. Is there a possibility that there's more than one gunshot wound to that area? Sure, could be. I mean, there's a lot of injury there. Very hard to, you can't really put it back together. Both the radius and the ulna, which are the two long bones of your forearm, are broken in multiple places. Okay, a lot of the skin, the soft muscle is gone.
Okay.
So
That's her arm, right?
that's your arm, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that's E and F. And then let's look at G.
You can't see A in this photograph. Oh, I beg your pardon. You can see the letter A. C is, C is here. These are, there's an injury on her ear, and there are injuries that we call abrasions. It's a blunt force injury, it's a friction injury, it's a drying injury. They're kind of yellow-red, makes you think there's not a lot of blood flowing to that area when those injuries happened, but those are blunt force injuries.
What would cause a blunt force injury?
Well, an abrasion is caused by friction. So anything that can cause a frictional injury, when you fell off your bike, when you're learning how to ride it and you skinned your knee, that's an abrasion.
Could a gunshot wound have anything to do with that?
Those aren't consistent with a gunshot wound.
All right, so we have A, we know is an entrance, and then B exit. C was the same entrance from that A, correct?
The re-entrance, that's right.
Let's go back to G now. So we did A, B, C, D, and then E, F on the right arm, and then now this G looks like the left arm, right?
So G is an entrance wound. This is a penetrating gunshot wound, which means that I got a projectile. I recovered a projectile from the body at the end of the pathway of this bullet. This path, this projectile, is taken from right behind the right scapula, which is your shoulder blade. Okay, it gets the trachea in the neck, it gets the spinal cord, it gets the esophagus, the left carotid artery, which is the big artery that feeds blood up to your brain, and then I recover the projectile.
So which way? It went into her arm and then which way?
So left to right,
Left to right?
because I get it from behind the scapula
Okay.
on the right side.
Scapula,
Shoulder blade,
shoulder blade. Okay.
yeah.
And so you said you got a projectile from that one. I'm going to show you what's already been admitted as 312.
That's it.
12 and 3, 321. Same thing. All right.
That's correct.
Okay. The other ones we talked about, A, B, C, D, E, and F. Was there any projectiles found?
There was not.
Now, if someone's shot, are you always going to find a projectile in their body?
Not if it's perforating. If I have an entrance and an exit, there's not a projectile recovered.
All right, so the two words then,
Perforating.
Perforating means it's going through, right?
Perforates through.
Through and through, out. And what's the other one?
Penetrating.
Penetrating.
So it penetrates, so I still will have a projectile at the end of the pathway of that bullet.
All right. So the bullet that went in through, or the projectile that went in through G, we have projectiles that was recovered by you, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you said that that one went through quite a few things. What did it go through again, the path?
So skin, soft tissue, muscle, the left carotid artery, the trachea, which is your windpipe, the fifth cervical vertebrae, so that's vertebrae in your neck. I'm going to read it to you so I don't miss anything. First and second right ribs are fractured. Contusion of the upper lobe of both the right and left lung, so both chest cavities. And then I recovered 850 milliliters of blood from one chest cavity and 900 milliliters of blood from the other chest cavity. That there's bleeding inside of her chest.
Is that normal?
Not normal without injury.
So if I'm not shot, should we expect to find that amount of blood in my chest?
There should be no blood in your shot. No blood in your chest if you have no kinds of injuries.
Now, is that, you said it hit the carotid artery, is that a pretty fatal injury?
Carotid artery is a high pressure. Arteries are under the blood pressure from when your heart pumps. So you're going to lose more blood every time your heart beats. More importantly, the carotid artery is what takes blood to your brain.
Okay.
Okay, so in that blood is the oxygen that your brain needs to be able to be conscious and function.
Did we talk about, yeah, we talked about D. D was the exit of ABCD.
Correct.
Correct? And that's number D too. I don't know if we showed that. Is that the exit wound?
That's the exit that started with A in the chin.
We'll talk a bit more about why some of these wounds are bigger than others. But let's then go to the fourth part, or fourth gunshot, H and I. Where did that occur? We'll look at
It's in the left hand. So the fifth finger of the left hand.
and tell us about what H and I is.
So H is the entrance. This is a perforating gunshot wound. I have an entrance and an exit. It enters at H and exits at I.
Did it do damage to her finger area?
Lots of broken, the fifth phalange and metacarpals in the hand. So the phalange is on your finger. Those are broken, and skin and soft tissue hemorrhage.
Do you have any idea how quickly Kelly would have died?
No idea.
How about the type of firearm or ammunition that could be used? And let me give you a hypothetical. First of all, are you going to tell us with certainty whether this was caused by a .40 caliber or whether this was caused by an assault rifle ammunition?
I will not.
And is that generally medical examiners are not going to tell us that information? Is that correct?
That's correct. My job is cause and manner.
All right. But could you tell us or give us an opinion, your professional opinion, of what appears to be more consistent with these injuries?
I can tell you that, and it's more evident in the next case, is that the fragmenting of the pieces that we get is more consistent with a .223 or a semi-automatic, as it would be from a pistol or.
Well, what does that mean? What do you mean? And let's just talk about Kelly right now. Can you tell us whether or not Kelly Dougherty's injuries were caused by an assault rifle or a handgun semi-automatic?
They're gunshot wounds.
Okay. Now, as a medical examiner, do you have the, or do you all examine the clothes that the person is brought in with?
We do.
So when the body's brought in the body bag, was Kelly fully clothed?
She was.
And you said you clean the body, so you have to take out the clothes and lay them out and they're photographed, correct?
That's correct.
All right, I'm going to show you of that exhibit number I, J, K, and L, and M and N, I believe. We'll just, we might not show all of them, but did you have an opportunity just to look at these clothes and determine or look at areas that you believed are indications of gunshot wound or damage?
What we document in the clothing are any defects that are in the clothes. We put little arrows to them and take photographs. Other than seeing if there's holes where there are defects in a cursory manner, that's really the extent of my examination of the clothing.
Let's look then at one pretty evident defect, and that's in J. Kelly's hand was damaged, right?
That's correct.
Both hands had left and right. Did you notice damage to her jacket as well?
There's damage that's corresponds to the damage on her hand, on her left hand.
And up here too, the shoulder area.
That's correct.
And she had a jacket on, she also had a dress on. And you all looked at both the dress and the jacket, correct?
That's correct.
If we look at N, we can see, rather than bringing in all this clothing, you all take pictures for us, correct?
That's correct.
And did the dress appear this color with blood?
There was blood on the clothing.
Did you, like Dr. Juice, did you take x-rays of Kelly's body?
So in any case that comes into the medical examiner's office where there are defects that are consistent with either stab wounds or gunshot wounds, then we do x-ray the bodies to look for any retained projectiles so we can collect them. So the bodies of gunshot wound victims are x-rayed.
One moment. Thank you. And did you do so in this case?
We did?
Let's look at an x-ray. This is one of the x-rays of Kelly.
This is the x-ray of Kelly's right shoulder.
Tell us what this, and we're looking at,
May I get up?
tell us what the x-ray of Kelly's right shoulder showed.
May I get up?
You may.
So this is the right shoulder. There's two different pathways that are shown in this x-ray. The first is the exit through the arm, that was D, that we saw.
Right, this is D, that's reflected in exhibit. Is that it?
That's not.
Okay.
Yes.
That was the exit wound.
That's the exit wound, and that's where this humerus gets fractured. That's the long one at the top of your arm. The other thing you see in this x-ray is the final resting place of the gunshot wound that's labeled G that went in the left shoulder and across the neck. And this is the projectile, the photograph that you saw that was recovered. So that's the entrance.
And is that the projectile that we labeled projectile from the scapula?
That's right.
Okay. So,
It's that one.
all right, so this photo, this x-ray gives us evidence about G, but it also talks about D and the damage that the entrance or exit.
CD, right. So the pathway of ABCD, this is the CD
Okay.
that goes through the right arm, which is separate from G, which is the projectile that I collected from the fourth gunshot.
And do you all do this before you cut open the body and go
Absolutely.
in, kind of guide you, tell you where, hey, there's a projectile, or there's fragments, things like that?
That's correct.
And let's look at, we're on the right side, Kelly's right elbow and forearm. That's what this X-ray shows.
So this photograph of the hand, okay, there are defects in the hand, the wrist, it looks like.
And let's get the corresponding photo. Which injuries were those?
This is the right side.
Was that the HI? The HI? Or the, sorry.
No, this is the F.
I think the HI is the left.
So this is EF.
Okay, let me do the left hand first. So the left hand of Kelly,
So this is HI. This
HI.
is the defect that goes through the hand on this side and then through the finger. So we have fractures in both the metacarpal, okay, and then the first bone of the left hand.
and,
There we go.
all right, so then, obviously I wouldn't, well, one of them is bigger shot. Correct? All right. Let's look at P now. You have the right elbow and, forearm and hand. Does that go with E?
This is EF, that's correct. So that's the gunshot wound to the right forearm.
All right, tell us what happens here. What did that gunshot really do?
There's just multiple fractures of the bones on the right arm, so it's just torn.
And all that's caused by a bullet going through?
When projectiles break bone, bone is also sharp. So that's another reason why those injuries can be so deforming, is that if the ends of the bones that were fractured by the bullet are also sharp, or even can blast apart, and those pieces can come out as well and tear the skin. So it's just a deforming, just lots of fractures.
So we have a total of 4 gunshot wounds with Kelly. What did you determine the cause and the manner of death to be?
So the cause of Kelly's death was multiple gunshot wounds, and the manner is homicide.
Did you see any defensive wounds on Kelly, like where she, had injuries to her fingernails, where she's fighting someone off or anything?
The only blunt force injuries that she had were the abrasions that we saw on her ear and neck.
Okay. And her toxicology, did she have some drugs in her system?
She did?
What'd she have in her system?
So Kelly has marijuana metabolites. She has,
When you say metabolites, is that like, what is that?
so when people take drugs, a lot of them will start as one compound, and when they get in the blood after time, they break down into different compounds, some of which are active and some of which are not active. With Kelly, she has both what I call a parent drug, which is actual marijuana that's not broken down yet, and she also has 2 metabolites of marijuana.
Okay.
She has an alcohol level of 0.15, and she has amphetamine in her blood.
Could amphetamines be like something like ADHD medicine?
Amphetamine, there's no methamphetamine, so the amphetamine can be a prescribed drug. There's no way for me to tell
Okay.
whether the amphetamine that's in her blood is from a prescription or from an illicit source.
Amphetamines could be legally like Ritalin or Vyvanse or something like that?
Correct.
Okay, go ahead.
And she also has cocaine. And again, she's got the parent cocaine, and she's got a number of cocaine metabolites, which are just, they used to be cocaine, but now we've broken down into other chemicals.
Any of these drug substances, let me just rephrase that, did Kelly die from anything related to the drugs? Drug overdose case?
Not in my opinion.
All right. Gunshot wounds are how she died?
Correct.
Now, the rest of Kelly's autopsy, you said you look for signs of, you kind of look all throughout the body.
Right.
Is there anything else unusual? In other words, did she have, a bad heart, anything like that?
No.
Everything else healthy
Everything
for
else was good. That's right.
20-year-old girl?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, in terms of the alcohol level and the drugs, you can't give us a professional opinion as to how you think any of that would have affected her, if it was affecting her at all. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Now, let's go to Brandi. And her autopsy photos would be marked as 324, 8 through 5.
Excuse me.
Let's get some background information or some information, general information on Brandi. Tell us age, gender, sex, or gender, race.
So Brandi was a 24-year-old white female. She was 60 inches tall and 118 pounds.
What's 60 inches? Is that 5 feet tall?
5 feet tall.
5 feet tall.
5 feet long,
5 feet long.
because we do length, because they're laying down. So
All right.
we're not always 100% accurate when we're measuring somebody sideways as opposed to.
Okay. Let's go through A, and there's a few parts of her, in order to illustrate her injuries, we see her vaginal area. I'm just going to cover up a few of the areas that aren't necessary to look at, but that we need to see injuries on, if that makes sense. But let's look first at Brandi's identification photo. States Exhibit A. Is that Brandi?
That is?
It looks like there's some issues on her face. Can you tell us how Brandi came to you?
Again, like Kelly, she came sealed in a white body bag, sealed with a red tag that was broken by myself. The body bag is opened and we start our photographs, our as-is photographs.
Okay. Did you notice that Brandi had some evidence of like exposure to fire or something?
She's got what I called thermal changes
What's that mean?
on areas of her body. So you can have thermal injuries.
Thermal, okay.
And you can have thermal changes. To me, a thermal change usually happens post-mortem. So in my opinion, these were injury or changes that occurred from where she was positioned after this happened.
And, to cut to the chase, if Brandi was shot and the velocity of the gun force made her fall forward and she fell into a smoldering fire pit, would the injuries she received from that fire pit have been post-mortem? Is that what you mean?
Well, I don't know how she came to rest where they found her. I don't know what was going on in that smoldering pit on the 5th of February, right? And even so, I can't say. What I can say, and I also don't know exactly where she was, because what our investigator told us was that she had been moved when they were looking for signs of life. So trying to figure out where she was even placed on, at, in, would all just be me hypothesizing, so I can't.
Just to make it clear, though, the belief is that the burning injuries didn't happen when she was alive.
That's correct.
Right. I just want to make that
Yeah.
clear. That those happened.
They're thermal
after
changes.
She died, she then got burned, okay?
Correct.
All right, you agree with that?
Then the thermal changes happened to her body, that's correct.
Okay. All right. Stepping back to Kelly, did you find any evidence of stippling or muzzle imprints, anything to indicate that any of the gunshots to Kelly were at very close range?
All 4 of Kelly's gunshot wounds were what I called indeterminate range, which means there's no evidence of soot or gunpowder stippling on the surfaces of the skin.
Okay. Same question with Brandi. Any evidence of stippling or anything that would indicate to you that her gunshot injuries were at close range?
All 5 of Brandi's gunshot wounds are indeterminate range gunshot wounds.
So no evidence of close
soot or
range.
stippling on the skin.
And you jump to my next question, how many gunshot wounds did Brandi have?
5.
Okay. So did you, like you did with Kelly, label Brandi's gunshot wounds beginning with A, or how did we do that?
That's correct, beginning with A.
Okay. Begin to describe to us what the first gunshot wound, or the one that you list as 1A.
So my first gunshot wound is a perforating gunshot wound, has an entrance and an exit. The entrance is K, is in the posterior torso, and the exit is A. So it goes in the back and comes out the anterior aspect of the neck.
All right, so let me show you what's been marked as F. You know, as opposed to Kelly, we saw the gunshot wound, one of the interns was like on her face, right?
Correct.
Brandi's different, is that right? The entrance wounds in the back?
3 of the 5 entrance wounds are in the back.
All right, so show us then where the first entrance wound is.
So K, may I get up?
You may.
K is the first gunshot wound. Okay, so I start on the front of the body and go A to J in this case.
Uh-huh.
When I turn the body over to the back, I start as best I can and go down again. So the very first gunshot wound going from head to toe and back is K.
Okay. And tell us what the path of that body, of that wound is.
So K goes into the back. It hits skin, soft tissue, muscle, and bone, the upper lobe of the left lung. Now this gets the thoracic spine and spinal cord. So your vertebral column has 3 different sections. The cervical is in your neck. The thoracic, which houses all of your ribs, is in the middle of your torso, and then your lumbar spine is the last 5 vertebrae. So this goes through the thoracic spine. It doesn't, what we call transect the spinal cord. So when I looked into we unroofed the spinal column, the cord is intact, so it's not, the projectile didn't go through it, but there's injury to the cord. There's blood, there's epidural or subdural blood around the cord. So there's a cord contusion, a bruise, but not actually cut in 2.
Okay. If I could have one moment.
Yes. Yes, you may.
Sorry. And I'm going to mark this one. Our exhibit was marked through Y, I think. Let me just mark this double A, this one right here. So I'm sorry, doctor. So the first one is K, is the entrance wound, correct?
That's correct.
And then A shows the exit wound of that one?
That's correct.
All right. And show us where that is. So A is an exit. All right, so it went in through K and came out through her neck area?
That's correct.
And what organs did it go through, if any?
Skin, soft tissue, the left lung, I'm cheap. The thoracic spine, okay, didn't perforate the cord, but there was a contusion or a bruise on the cord. The trachea, the esophagus, and that's it.
Why are these, is this exit wound? Why is it so much larger than the entrance wound? You don't know?
Because it is. Yeah.
Is that uncommon or in that of her?
Projectiles can do anything, okay? There's a big debate about, entrance versus exit. What really matters, is she up against a surface? Does the projectile disintegrate and hit some bone and burst into multiple pieces? I mean, there's, you can show pictures of the exact same projectile doing many different things depending on what objects it hits and the position of the body when it's hit.
Can you sometimes see, and you can't answer this without guessing, so to speak, can you sometimes see pretty large exit wounds when you're getting hit with fire from an assault rifle?
You can?
All right, so we have K through A. Any projectile recovered from that one?
No.
Let's talk about the next in your series of the 5. Your entrance wound is what? L?
Correct.
So we have another entrance wound in her back. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the left lateral torso, we call that.
And tell us where L, what the path of that bullet went.
So L gets the lower lobe of the left lung. So your lung has an upper and a lower lobe. Your right lung has 3 lobes, an upper, a middle, and a lower. So L gets the lower lobe of the left lung. The pericardial sac, which is a fibrous sac that holds your heart in place in the middle of your chest. It takes off basically the apex of her heart, which is the very bottom. So your heart has 4 chambers, a right and a left atria, which are the 2 on top, and a right and a left ventricle, which are the 2 on the bottom. The right and the left ventricle come together to the bottom, which is the apex. The apex of her heart is shot through. It gets the left lobe of her liver, and then muscle, soft tissue, and skin.
Okay, and where does it go out?
So this
Showing you double A again.
goes out B, C, and D.
And how does that happen? If there's one gunshot wound to the back, why do we have multiple exits?
Well, this projectile fragmented, but the other interesting thing is that it's right up against where the wire on your brassiere would be. Sometimes that can make projectiles do funny things.
Like it, what do you mean? Like if it hits something hard?
Correct.
All right, and let's look at what you're talking about is M and N. Is the bra, when Brandi came to you, was her bra snapped open
It was? I don't know that it snapped open, it's broken.
or broken?
Correct.
So when it came to, her bra came to you like this, was it still on her? Or had
Yes.
they taken it?
No.
Okay. So it's.
But there's even, I think there's even more damage if you have a picture of the other side of it. Or maybe I just can't see it because of my
Do, but look at N.
Yeah, I think that shows better.
Okay, what is this?
Because there's multiple holes all through the bottom of that that part of the bra. That's the bottom, I think.
And is the bottom the part, women would know, I don't know if men would know, but the
Where the wire is.
wire that's covered with cloth,
Correct.
was that bullet, did it hit that area where the wire is?
It looked like it hit that area.
Okay, and that, could that cause a fragment?
I mean, it certainly can.
Okay. Let's say, if you have, they call them, hollow point bullets that break up in your body, could that cause different exit wounds?
I mean, any kind of ammunition can cause a lot of different kinds of
So-
exit wounds.
The exit wounds are B, C, and D?
Correct.
Where's the D one? Down here? Right here?
So C is this one here,
Okay.
and D is this one here.
All right, and D's there. It's, we have a lot of, it looks like skin discoloration here. What was that caused?
So these are part of the thermal changes I was talking about. Okay, so this is skin slippage, which happens, usually happens with decomposition or increased heat. Now, she's not decomposed. You'll see in another picture in her exit wounds in her abdomen where her intestines are, there's green discoloration. So that's the beginning stages of decomposition. This is not decomposed. So this is not the skin slippage that we associate with decomposition. This is skin changes that we associate with increased heat.
Okay, all right. So that's the second gun wound, entrance L, exit B, C, D. How about the third gunshot wound?
So this is M,
3 in the back?
right? 3 in the back. This is M. This is an entrance gunshot wound. And the left, again, it's the lateral aspect of the back on the left side.
And what was the trace? But to go back to the second one, no projectile or fragment was recovered, am I correct?
Correct.
So we don't have a projectile or fragment on the first gunshot wound or the second gunshot wound. Tell us about the third one now, M. Where did that bullet travel?
So this bullet gets skin, soft tissue, and muscle. It gets both the small and the large intestine and the mesentery, which is like the net that holds the intestine together in your abdomen. And it's got all the lymph nodes and the blood vessels and stuff in there that you need to get blood and nutrients to your bowels.
And
Those are the only organs that it hit.
it goes through E, F, G. I'm not sure that I have a photograph of the exit wounds. Where was the exit wound?
So there are 3.
Uh-huh,
They are E, F, and G.
uh-huh.
And these, I get a fragment from the abdomen, a fragment from the pubis, and a piece of jacket from the abdominal wall. So all of these are very small pieces that are taken very superficially out of the front.
I'm going to name this BB, and we'll cut it in a moment. Right here. And let's see where we get to. Moving on to evidence. EFG, is that correct?
Correct.
All right, so tell us it went through her,
Skin, soft tissue, and muscle, and then basically the colon, large and small bowels, and the mesentery that holds it.
all right.
Very small fragments were taken from just underneath the skin here, here, and here.
Okay, very small projectile fragments?
Little pieces of projectile, that's correct.
All right. Would the pubis area be in there? Is that how you would describe it?
Yes, right here.
Okay. And so, and fragment from abdominal muscle?
Correct,
Jacket from abdominal wall?
correct.
Jacket, and let me show you, we've already admitted these, but it's, the exhibit number is T, U, V, W, X, and Y. These ones that we admitted?
Yes. Correct.
And then that's you. Fragment from abdominal wall is B.
Correct.
Or abdominal muscle, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Then we have jacket from abdominal wall, that's W. Then we have, it's listed jacket, that's X. And then fragment from, I believe it's lateral thigh.
Well, yeah, but I think that other one, if you'll go to the x-ray,
Okay.
because I think that piece, that's the jacket piece that's taken from the x-ray. If you look at the x-ray, you can see the,
Okay, we'll hit the x-rays in a minute.
but there are 3 pieces of a projectile that are taken from, superficially from the skin.
And there's a difference between a full projectile and then the fragments, correct?
Correct.
And you all label them differently, right?
Well, we label, the technicians will label them whatever we tell them to label them, like usually from where I get it. You know, is it a jacket fragment or a core fragment, and where did it come from?
So we talked about the third gunshot wound, which was M, which came out EFG, correct?
Correct.
How about the fourth gunshot wound?
This is in the right lower extremity. So
What's
it,
that mean, extremity?
so you have 4 extremities, you have 2 upper extremities of your arms, right? 2 lower extremities of your legs. So this 4th gunshot wound goes into the anterior, which is the front part of the right thigh.
That's the fourth gunshot wound?
That's correct.
All right, and then I'll show you what we're going to mark as B. What is marked as B? I and J? Tell us about
Correct.
that.
So this gunshot wound goes from the anterior right thigh, and it exits the anterior right leg just above the knee.
So it comes in I and goes out J?
Correct.
So
And-
I is here. Right there, correct?
Correct.
And it comes out J.
Correct. Now, but this is also a gunshot wound that is both perforating and penetrating, okay? Because I get some fragments out of her leg, but she also has fragments that exit.
Okay, we'll look at the x-rays in a minute. Okay. What else, does it go through any other organ, no organ in your leg, right? What
Skin,
happens?
soft tissue, and muscle. I think the bone's intact,
Okay,
so it doesn't fracture the bone.
all right. And what is the fifth gunshot wound?
So she has a graze wound. So what a graze wound is a gunshot wound that just kind of grazes through your body. So to her right forearm, there's a graze wound.
All right. Is that labeled,
It might not be labeled.
I don't know if you labeled it or not. I have one that's labeled H, is this it? See,
Yes.
it looks like more than a graze.
Well, I mean, some people would call that tangential. I mean, it just doesn't, it really just goes through one part. It's only that anterior or the part of her arm.
So in other words, it doesn't go through, it just skims the top?
Correct.
Kind of, but it still causes damage?
Correct.
Okay, and we see this slippage again, discoloration, what's the cause of that?
Those are thermal changes.
That could have been caused if she fell, after she died, fell into a smoldering fire, maybe?
They're caused, in my opinion, by whatever was going on in that smoke pit.
Okay.
Before, after, during, where in the chain of events it happened, I can't tell you.
Okay. Let's go back to, I want to go back to I and J. You told us about fragments that you found. So let's look at E. Did you take photographs of those fragments before you pulled them out?
So in some cases we do. So this is a photograph of one of the fragments that are taken out of J.
Okay. And then, find some fragments on her knee.
There are fragments in her knee.
When we say fragments, we mean bullet fragments. You can kind of see the silver color.
It's a piece of the core of the projectile. That's correct.
And then is H kind of showing us another area where that is?
Correct. Actually, I don't, go back to the one, I think that's the one that was, I think that's the one that I took out of her pubis
Right.
with the hair there.
And when you say that one, you mean H?
Sorry, yes, H,
That's okay.
yeah.
And the pubis meaning towards the pubic area?
The one that I took out right above the pubic area, correct.
Let's look at her clothes quickly, and then we'll look at some of the x-rays quickly. Same thing, Brandi, she came clothed.
She did?
And did you notice, showing age, did you notice that there's some defects in her clothes?
There were defects in her clothing.
Were some of the defects in her clothing from the back that would be consistent with the 3 gunshot wounds to her back?
They were.
And showing J. Kind of hard to see, she had a printed shirt, but did you all put little,
We put arrows where the defects are.
and close-up of K, a closer up of the matrix defect,
That's correct.
and then L, on the whole shirt, did she have blood all over her shirt?
There was blood on her shirt.
Let's look at some of her x-rays. Let's start with P. X-ray of her skull and neck area.
And it's unremarkable. There's nothing.
Oh, there's nothing.
No, ma'am. Other little fragments maybe, but
Maybe a fragment right there.
from the exit that went through her, the right side of her neck.
Okay, let's look at her chest, which is labeled Q. When you say unremarkable, that means there's nothing drastic there?
In a gunshot wound case, what I'm looking for are big projectile pieces, radio opaque, where they show up nice and white, so that we can collect them as evidence for crime scene.
This chest fragments,
A couple of scattered, mostly down on the left, right, correct.
you didn't find any big projectile that we can match up to anything Brandi can do.
There's a jacket in the leg, I think. There was a nice piece of a jacket,
Okay, that
But-
might or might not have been able to.
but not as nice a piece as the one that we got from Kelly.
Right, from not as nice as the one, because scapula that
Correct,
was in pretty decent condition, right?
correct,
All right, Brandi had a bunch of fragments throughout. right?
correct.
And then the abdominal wall of Brandi, what does this show us?
So this again shows a lot of little pieces, fragments of projectile.
And how do we know that? I think you said something about being open.
Because they're radio opaque, so anything that lights up, I mean, even an orthopedic screw, you know, one in your knee, it's gonna light up, a rod in your knee, for replacement, that's gonna light up. And those are radio opaque, so all of these little fragments here are projectile fragments. And we collect as many of those as we can.
And then the pelvis area of Brandi. Pieces, a little bigger pieces, but still pieces.
Yeah, and they're still very superficial in the skin.
When you say superficial, okay, well, let me withdraw that. Right shoulder. I mean, is it broken or not? No, okay. Just a few more questions questions. When you say, she had a lot of superficial fragments, what do you think was the shot that killed her? If you can narrow it down.
Any case I do that's gunshot wounds, that's more than one. Their cause of death is always multiple gunshot wounds.
Okay.
Even though with Brandi, I have a shot that basically takes out the bottom of her heart. If I take away that shot, it doesn't mean the other three, she wouldn't have bled out or died from those.
Okay.
So to me, she died of multiple gunshot wounds.
Right.
Now, the one that was the most worrisome, is probably the one that took out the apex of her heart.
And obviously, you get damage like that to your heart, it's going to cause blood, your brain's going to eventually shut down, things like that, correct?
Correct.
Do you know how long it took her to die?
No clue.
And I don't know if I asked you, but the cause and manner of death of Brandi.
Brandi died of multiple gunshot wounds as her cause of death. Her manner of death is homicide.
All right. She had some drugs in her tox too, correct?
She did.
And just go through those. First of all, did any of them kill her? Was this an overdose death?
This is not an overdose death.
What is
She has an ethanol level in her blood of 0.035. So if you're driving a car and you get pulled over and you're over a 0.08, you're too intoxicated to drive. Okay? She's at a 0.035.
Okay.
She also is positive for both parent cocaine, so cocaine itself, plus cocaine's metabolites when it breaks down. She's got the breakdown products of cocaine as well. She also has MDMA, which some people call Molly or...
Ecstasy?
Yep.
Okay. And the studies about Molly and ecstasy, is there anything you don't know how or even if it was affecting her?
No clue.
Same thing with the cocaine, right?
Correct.
Okay, all right. And cause and manner of death, though, had nothing to do with drugs, it was the gunshots, right?
That's correct.
All right, I don't have anything further.
Cross?
Good afternoon, Doctor.
How are you?
Good. All right, so I want to talk to you first about Kelly Dougherty's injuries. The first one that you described, which is A to B, C to D.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That particular gunshot wound goes through the chin and through the mandible. That's how you describe it.
Chin mandible.
Right. And the mandible, in terms of bones, it's a large, thick bone.
That's correct.
All right, so a lot of force required to actually penetrate through the mandible.
Well, right, and a projectile is traveling at a very high velocity.
Right.
So certainly, yes.
Okay, and then it actually exits, and you indicate goes into the upper chest and actually fractures a bone in the arm or the shoulder.
That's correct.
Okay, and then continues to exit.
Then goes out. That's correct.
All right, and does so without leaving any type of resulting fragments from the bullet.
That's correct.
Okay, so that would be pretty consistent with a very high velocity rifle round.
It's a gunshot wound.
Okay, but is it consistent with a high velocity rifle round?
Could be.
Okay, and the other injury that you described is the one that goes through the arm and through the chest and takes out the lower part of the heart.
That's Brandi.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's Brandi.
Okay, I do it too.
Okay, but you did get a projectile, an intact projectile from
One
Kelly.
on Kelly from her left arm, G.
Okay.
I do get a projectile behind the scapula, that's correct, on the right side.
Okay.
And that goes through the trachea and the carotid and the spine.
So that's the one that crosses over
Yes,
with
ma'am.
Kelly. All right. And would you agree, though, I know you don't like to give us, ideas about what type of gun is used. Would you agree that if a ballistic expert actually examined that projectile and concluded that that was a rifle round, then clearly that's consistent with a rifle round injury.
If that's what the guy that took the projectile and said it, then absolutely. I would
Okay.
rely on him.
All right. And then we've already talked about, with the state, you talked about this very large injury that she has on her left forearm, right?
Correct.
Which breaks both bones in the forearm.
That's correct.
Okay, could also be consistent with a rifle round.
Correct. I mean, even non-rifle rounds traveling at that velocity with the gunpowder behind it can break bones. So, I mean, pellet gun, BBs, can't break bones. But certainly, most, not all, projectiles that are shot out of a gun, if it's shot and it is in the pathway of a bone, will break that bone.
So, and I want to talk to you for a minute about, Kelly, about these injuries that you describe as being sort of blunt force trauma. Because that word, usually when we hear sort of blunt force trauma, the injuries here on the neck, we're thinking about somebody actually being hit with something.
No, so in forensic pathology, when we characterize injuries that are made by blunt force, we have abrasions, which, like I said, was a frictional injury. We have lacerations, which is an injury that is a blunt force injury. So somebody that is struck or someone that is hit with something that causes enough force to break that skin, that's a laceration. You're going to have a contusion, which is a bruise underneath your skin. Those are all blunt force injuries. So just because I'm describing something as an abrasion, it is a frictional injury, doesn't mean that it's an injury from an altercation. An abrasion is a blunt force injury. Does that make sense? Just by
Yes.
definition.
And so in this particular case with Miss Dougherty, she had an injury. That injury to her neck is on,
Left side.
appears to be on the right side of the neck,
I think it's left.
left side of the neck. Okay. And she also had an injury to the left hand.
The left hand is a gunshot wound.
Right.
The left neck is more blunt force.
Right.
Abrasion.
No, I understand. Okay, but it is the same side, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Were you aware that when you looked at the clothing of Miss Dougherty, that she was wearing sort of a heavy jacket that had a number of metal buttons and zippers on it?
I knew she was wearing a black denim jacket. I mean, I can't recount how many, I'm not looking at buttons and things like that. My main objective at looking at clothing when they come into the autopsy room before the autopsy is looking for holes and do they coincide with the wounds that I have. Then they're taken to crime scene and they do most of the analysis of the clothing.
Sure, but in this case, you spent some time talking to the state about the bra that Brandi had on that had the underwire.
Right, but that's correct.
Okay, and I mean, the underwire in the bra is a pretty thin piece of metal.
Sure.
Okay, but even with a projectile making impact with that, it can cause changes in the projectile.
Changes to what the injuries look like, the
Right.
exits, that's correct.
Okay, and so with regard to Miss Dougherty, is there any way that you could rule out the possibility that some fragments of bullets or projectiles that came from another person nearby, or which deflected off of metal that was on her jacket, could have caused those abrasions that were near her neck?
Yeah.
Could be from any of
That would
that.
be a blunt force injury as well.
Okay.
I mean, some of them may even be what we call post-mortem insect activity, the smaller ones on the bottom, because there's ants and other animals that, that can cause injuries that look like abrasions after someone passes away. Not the big ones, but the little tiny ones, for sure.
Okay. All right. And so with Ms. Dougherty, one of the things you talked about with the state was you talked about she had this positive toxicology, right?
Correct?
And the positive toxicology included both the amphetamine as well as cocaine.
And alcohol.
Okay, but specifically amphetamine and cocaine, those are stimulants to the system.
That's correct.
All right, and one of the things that happens when somebody has the type of injuries that Ms. Dougherty has is that she's bleeding internally.
Correct.
Right, and it is the loss of blood from the main blood vessels that decreases oxygen and eventually leads to death.
That's correct.
All right, and so the faster one's heart is beating, the more quickly they are going to die.
Correct.
All right, so would you agree that cocaine and stimulants such as amphetamine can have an effect in speeding up death?
Sure.
Okay. And with regard to Ms. Al-Sahi, the injuries that you've described on her body, would you agree that all of those wounds are consistent with rifle injuries?
The exit, certainly, yes.
Okay. She also had a similar amount. She had cocaine, and she also had ecstasy, which is also a stimulant.
It's a different mechanism, but cocaine for sure.
Okay, which would increase the heart rate and increase the quickness of death.
The cocaine would increase the heart rate. So
All right.
with every beat of the heart, as long as her heart beat, because the bottom, then you're going to lose more blood because your heart is beating faster. That's correct.
Okay, and so I recognize that when you're talking to the state that you indicated you couldn't really tell us how quickly these individuals died from their injuries. Were you aware, for instance, that when Ms. Dougherty died, that she had a burning cigarette in her hand?
Did not.
Okay. And obviously, with regard to Ms. El-Sahi, you've talked about she had thermal injuries on her body, right?
Thermal changes?
Right. Which would have been painful were she awake and cognizant of what was going on.
She has a spinal cord injury, okay? And she also, I can't tell you the order in which the shots happened, but one of those shots takes out the bottom of her heart. Okay, so you've got a heart that's beating faster because she does have parent cocaine on board. I don't know how hot. I never saw the fire. I mean, I didn't see any of it. If I had it in my head, I could say, well, but I didn't see it. Were they just hot rocks? Were they just warm rock? So I can't tell you how hot that was, except that it wasn't hot enough to char her body if she was there for 7 or 8 hours from the time that they found her, or the time that
But if I tell you that she is only in that fire pit for a matter of minutes before removed by the first responders, does that make a difference?
well, then, if that is correct, then I wouldn't think it was that hot. I mean, it's skin slippage. It's not any burns that are doing anything more than disrupting the epidermis, which is the very top of the skin. So I would wonder how hot that fire pit really was.
Okay, but she has those type of thermal changes not only on her body but also on her face as well.
Or that's postmortem. Again, that could be a postmortem abrasion from insects.
Okay, all right.
Just one question. You said that Brandi had a spinal cord injury?
They both did, yeah. One was cervical and one was thoracic.
Would that alone by itself cause someone not to be able to move?
It can. Since the cord in both girls, the cord wasn't transected or cut in two, they both were contused or bruised with bleeding around them. There's no way to evaluate without being able to ask them to do a neuro exam, what their level of neurofunctioning is from that injury.
I know.
You may step down. Watch your step. Make sure you take all your stuff with you.
Thank you.
And thank you. Can I see the lawyers at the bench? Okay, we need about 10 minutes. We didn't take a real afternoon break for the lawyers. We'll take 10 minutes. I asked them, we have a short witness, but they need 5 minutes to talk to them. So we'll take 10-minute break. When we have you back in here, it's supposed to be relatively short, and then we'll break for the evening. So we're in good shape. Do you guys want to leave the room out here and get out? I got a yes. That's all it needs, one. Everybody turn your pads upside down. Don't talk about the case. Don't Google. No research.